Welcome everyone to our 136th webinar of our series. This one's a little bit special with Ray Studio 3 now being production. We have some different functionality in there, and while we've had some webinars where we talk about the general use of Ray Studio 3, and I suggest you go take a look at some of those. Those of you that are watching later in YouTube, down in the description box, I will have linked on all of the different functions and some of the webinars we've done about transitioning to Ray Studio 3 and some nuts and bolts of how to get in there and use it. Today we're talking about functionality and what it's going to look like when you open your time distance function for the first time, what some of the layout is, what some of it means, what you want to do with it, and of course make some changes, talk about those, and then even throw a couple of examples and go through those, ending it with an advanced discussion of maybe 4 or 5 minutes of some advanced topics that you might want to use, and then at the end of the webinar, saving that profile out and putting it as a link in the YouTube description box for anybody that wants to start right where we ended. And it might just be a great way for folks to see what we talked about, how we set it up, either set it up themselves or grab a file and do it that way. So as a user profile. So I appreciate everybody being here. We're going to have a great time. Today's topic is the time distance function. We're basically going to go through all of these tabs, these function buttons that are up here across the top, and we're starting with the leftmost button, and it's the most important function in the software. It's the one that's used the most, and because of that, we really wanted to start there as well. We've got a co-host today that has been with us many times. I did have a number that I was counting up, but it's I just changed it now to just many-time AIM Sports webinar co-host. Matt Romanowski from trailbreak.com. He's out there. He's a leading technical and stocking AIM Sports dealer. He's always out at the track helping folks. He's out doing this kind of work professionally as a data guy in the Trans Am series, I believe, plus more. And Matt, thanks for coming. I sure appreciate it.
Oh, no problem. I'm excited to be here. These sessions are so much fun. We have a great community going, and it's just such a great way to help people be able to use the software. And they're really fun. Like, if nothing else, I'd come here and do it just for myself because it's so much fun.
Exactly. Kind of the way I always felt about it as well. And Matt has also been volunteering his time to be a heavy tester of the beta software when it was beta, and as we were working our way up this way, and so for webinars like this, it's a pretty small pool for me to draw from people that have got enough experience to talk about certain things, and I think you're going to see Matt here on a couple of these upcoming functions. We're going to bring James Colburn in. I know always everybody has a great time when James comes here and talks about it, some of the different things. So we're going to have some different people come in here and join me as we talk about each function that's available to us. So looking forward to that. I'm going to jump back to the original slide here. Just talk a little bit before we jump in, that this is what your Ray Studio 3 production analysis software will look like when you first open up. By default, just the default settings of a time distance plot. Remember, we have clicked on the time distance icon. Here's a list of what those icons are. We're going to show the time distance layout today. Then we're going to be going through and we're going to be hitting all of these different layouts, and we're just going to talk about every single one of them. We did math channels the other day, and we've done a number of times, a number of webinars on track map functionality. So we're going to talk about all of these, and we'll touch into that icon probably nearly with every one of these webinars as well. So we're going to talk about the show the time layout, show the time distance layout, and then just a few things, especially maybe some things that are different from Ray Studio 2, but mainly how to get in there, how to get it set up, and some of the little things that you're going to run into that might trip you up. We just want to really get you set up with something that will work for you, so you're not beating your head against the wall. So the going to kind of hand it over to Matt a little bit on a few of these first slides, but the the time distance layout, it is, as I kind of start this up, it is kind of the root, the core of what we do most of the time. We call them the squiggly lines, right? It's where most people do a lot of their data analysis. And because of that, it's such an important one that we did this one as our first one of these. But it's such an important one that it's kind of the foundation of all of these. So Matt, if you can just give a little background on what you think of the time distance function, and then we will kind of jump through your slides and then jump into live data, which is where we're going to spend a good chunk of our time today.
Yeah, the time distance is so important to everything we do. And I think this whole seminar, we already have a great first question. And someone asked, what's the advantage of Ray Studio 3 versus 2 for analysis? And I think in this webinar, we're going to hit a lot of them. Peter commented in the chat, the linked video, no question, that's a huge thing. But the ability in all of our options of how we look at the data, how it's displayed, segments, everything about Ray Studio 3 is really a big jump from 2. And I think you'll see that as we kind of go through all these settings. So when we start out, the first graph almost everybody goes into is a time distance. And I highlighted the button, the arrow shows us what we get when we look at that. And then just as the name implies, we get time or distance across the bottom. And whatever measure we're looking at on the vertical axis, and that's the Y. So here we have speed, but you can plot temperatures, G-forces, anything that you get or that you log, you can put in there. And I don't know if my data is shared in this one, but it's shared in a ton of the previous videos. You can go in there and there's all different temperatures and tire temps and brake temps and all kinds of stuff that you can view here. But this is kind of the heart of where almost everybody does their analysis, is in the time distance plots.
Exactly, and a couple of things to add to that. You talk about your data. The guys will probably share in the chat box, and it'll be available in the YouTube description down below. I've got 3 data files, data and video integrated files that we've been sharing. One is Matt's from. Was it Lime Rock? I think it's Lime Rock, but we've got that. We've got Virginia, VIR, and I don't remember the other local, Watkins Glen. So there's some really good data that has video attached to it that you can bring in and play with this if you don't have any of your own data. Yep. So and Robbie has just linked that in the chat box, so that's available for you. And then for me, why 3 versus 2? It is virtually everything you have that I would have seen or I would have wanted in Ray Studio 2 from using that for 8 to 10 years. It is all the updates that we've always been wanting. So it's Emiliano said in the chat box a minute ago, Emiliano being the software team lead on this project, it was just written by an older him, right? So a lot more experience and a lot more current programming techniques and of course what the users want, so that's what's kind of cool about that. What do you show here, Matt?
And this is just a zoom in on that button. So when you get into Ray Studio 3 and you start the analysis, I kind of highlighted that little graphic of what the button really looks like, so you can you know where to click in case you have any trouble with it. And it's just kind of a mini time distance graph. And
then it will create the tab. And of course, if you continue to push all of them, you just end up with many tabs. But the individual function that we're going to focus on today is the time distance. Mm-hmm. At the top of that, you have a couple of things, and we're going to actually talk deeply about some of these. But by isolating this out, you've got some tools here that are very similar to what you used to have in Ray Studio 2 analysis. We've got our graphing options. We used to call that the secondary icon toolbar, but the graphing options for everything you're doing here. You've got, of course, your segment, map segments that are broken out up here. These have just been added a ton of functionality to them. We'll talk about that today as we get a little bit deeper. And then this one, which is a new one, but it's the line thickness and dot size. So if you wanted this line to be a little thicker, you'd now no longer have to go in through several menus to go and do that. You're given a couple of icons just to quickly jump in there and change that. So that's pretty handy. Here's a little bit of a closer one. I'll let Matt kind of tackle this one a little bit, but a little bit closer at what that icon toolbar is up here in the upper right and the couple of buttons. And what are these buttons down here showing us, Matt?
Yeah, one of the great things about Ray Studio 3 is it brings all these buttons, the most common interactions we have with the software, it pulls them up so that we don't have to click through menus or do anything else. They're right here. So we get the dot size and the lines. We're going to play with those when we go to live data. And then we get all of our kind of graphing options. So our first button, the stopwatch, is our plot by time or distance. The next one is our GPS time option. And I'm going through the order up in the top, Roger, in the graphic, not the individual buttons. And then we have our zoom options, and we can zoom to a selection, we can zoom in, we can zoom out, or we can zoom to a lap. Our next option is the snap button that snaps us to a lap or an area. And then we have our slice analysis mode, delta, that we're going to jump into, and then our view options where we can have them overlapped, mixed, or tiled. And those add a lot of power in how we kind of look at the data, and we'll see how they interact when we're actually in the software.
And what's interesting about this bottom half of the screen is this is basically telling us what it looks like when one or the other is selected. Like right here, we can see that the clock there's no face there, but we do have the measure tool here. If you were to click on the time icon in the live data, which we will do, you'll see this one will go more or less blank, and this one will have detail, which will tell you that you're in the time axis across the bottom. So it tells you when your delta's on versus when it's off by these changes. So just a little bit out of the manual that is that we snipped in there just to give you an idea of what the icons kind of look like.
Yep.
Okay, and then there's a settings box, and this is true for every different function we have, and this is what we're going to kind of close up with in a little bit later. So, but I did want to show it here. That we may start with it, we may end with it. We'll see where we go when we're in the live data. But every one of these, you can right click and you can get to this settings. There's a little wrench that you can click on to get to these settings. But these are very, very important when you're setting up your time distance function. It's the way that's all going to work for you, and what's going to be up front, and what's going to be kind of hidden in the back, and what's going to use and line widths and time compare bar and any number of things. So we'll talk more about that one when we get into the actual live data. You have anything to say about that one, Matt?
Yeah, one thing I think this highlights a little bit is in Ray Studio 3, there's a lot of ways you can interact with the software. We have so much flexibility. So we briefly talked about where you can click on the line or the dot size in the main view, but you can also set it here in the settings. So you have multiple ways to interact with everything, depending kind of on how you work. And as Roger and I have talked about software over the time, and you'll see it today, sometimes we do things really differently, not because one is right or wrong, just because that's kind of how our mind works and how we think about the software. So it's a good opportunity to look at these as you start using Ray Studio 3 and saying, like, what's the best way for me to get through this, and kind of what works in your workflow.
And we will talk about not only some small differences in the way that we do our work, but towards the end of today's webinar, we're going to talk about, I wanted to have the discussion, since this is the main, the time distance function is a main function of what we use. I wanted to talk a little bit, just Matt and I, and folks can throw in their opinion as well, as how are we going to use user profiles in Ray Studio 3. There is a difference, a couple of different ways you can do it. All of them will work. They may be right for me, and it may be different for Matt. It's kind of funny, as we were chatting about this yesterday. I have always been a certain way, and I'm kind of reverting a different way, and Matt is reverting towards where I was. So it's interesting. You have options in Ray Studio 3. We'll talk about those towards the end when we set a little bit of the table. So, okay, so we're going to jump out of the presentation materials. We're going to jump into some live data and show you what it looks like, and then just start clicking around. And of course, we'll be looking for some questions, comments if we're missing something, but we basically want to go upper left corner and work our way across and talk about what the different areas are, how you might use them, how you may change them. We're going to add a function or two, just like you would do if you had a brand new version of a time distance bar up, and begin to build it where it's something that you might want to use. So I'll let Matt kind of start a little bit, but so Matt, if you could just kind of go over the basic layout here. We've already talked a little bit about these icons, but if you can start there on the left side and talk about what comes up when they open their brand new time distance function.
Yeah. So when you open it up on the very left in that column, you'll have the channels list or the channels table. And with that, it gives you all the data you log. Now, my car, I've got almost 90 channels of data in there. So you see there's a huge list. If you come in with the Solo 2 and you bring that data in, you're going to have, I think it's about 16 or 18 channels where you'll have your G-forces and your speed and those kind of things. So that's where we get the list of all the options we have to then show in our data. And next to the button at the top where we have the channels, we have our laps. And with that, we can then select the lap out of our session that we want to look at. When we talk about the different ways we interact with the software, and Peter in the chat brought up a good point that with all these options, sometimes it brings complexity, but it only has to be as complex as you want to make it. It doesn't have to be a really complex thing. So a really easy way to interact with the software, I like to use the channels list, and I can click the little box next to the channels to turn them on or off, or I'm sorry, the laps to turn laps on and off. Roger, I think, usually uses the storyboard at the bottom.
That is the first place that we actually differ and have for quite some time. Is a lot of people like to come in here and check a lap to add their second lap if they want a second lap, right? So we just added that lap, and that's available to you, and that's a fantastic way of doing it. If you have the storyboard down here, which we'll get to in just a second on a little bit more detail, you can just simply click it there and leave your channels up here and grab laps down there. So again, different ways of doing the same kind of a thing, but that channels and laps toolbar, that channels table and laps table, very, very important. It's what helps us understand and get to understanding that, I've got RPM up here, but if I really wanted to know what my logger temp, that wherever the cursor is, all of these channel values for all of these 90 channels that we happen to have in this particular data set is filled in for us and telling us what is happening at that very millisecond. So, and then what do we add down here below?
And then down there below, we have the track map. And if you have internet, you can get it laid over various tiles. It could be a Google image, it could be a Bing image, all these different options that we can get there. And that's pretty powerful. If you don't have internet, you won't have that little globe and you'll just have the driven GPS line. Right. Still super powerful, and you can work with it a lot as you compare laps and you get into analysis. And then the main part of our window is we have our time distance, and kind of by default, Ray Studio 3 opens up with the storyboard below. So this gives us all of this is the standard screen you'll see the first time you open it up. And I think it's a good chance. Bruce puts it up a great question about how do we know how fast, how many hertz something is being logged at? And in our channels bar, which is one of the main interactions we kind of have, is when we go over a channel, we see the little gear to the left of the name. And when we click on that, it brings up all the channel options that goes with it. So very quickly, you can see in the center where Roger's highlighting, your sample rate is at 20 hertz for RPM here. This works for all the channels that you have data on. So really quick and powerful way to interact and get the details on what you're working with.
And if you want to manipulate or do any settings on that channel, kind of named appropriately up here, highlight the one in the list here. This list is the same as over here. You've since we started at RPM, that's where it's at. I could come in here and I could change, the filtering for that data. We can change the scaling. We can add some alarms. We can do all the different things we might want to do. And I might want to also go to the steering position and change it. You have to apply it, and then you can come and change something on the brake pressure. So the channel settings are accessed. One of the easiest ways, again, there's many different ways to get to it, but one of the easiest ways is with that little cogged wheel. So I'm going to apply an exit, and we just applied a little filter. You can kind of see what it looks like there, and you're off and running.
Right. So now, how do we interact with this time distance, and what are all these options we have? So the one that I use a lot as I'm working between my laptop and the monitor and the trailer, and then when I'm at home on the computers, is the line size. And they made this great little button where we can click the button. It gives us the drop down, and the default is 1, but we can really quickly choose a different size line. And so it can change the emphasis on there. And a really neat feature is if you want to go back to that default size, you can hold down the control key and click the button again, and it brings it right back to that default size of 1. Some special instances, if you want to see the actual data point, we can go and turn the buttons, dots on. So when we go in there, we can set the dot to 2 or 3. And as we start to zoom in, and we'll talk about a whole bunch of different ways to zoom, and maybe it's a good time. So I think what Roger just did was use the scroll wheel on his mouse.
Yep. It's my default method of scrolling in and out is the scroll wheel on the mouse.
Yeah. If you're on a mouse pad, you can pinch, or, you can use your fingers to zoom in or out. Hotkeys, you can use your up and down arrows. Those zoom in as well. Yep. And then we have the buttons for it. So we can zoom in just with the button. We can zoom out with the button on our top right, or we can go to a whole app where Roger has here. It's the zoom reset, and it brings us to the full slice. And we have the option to zoom to a specific area, and we click the button, and then we highlight an area, and it zooms us to that. So when we're zoomed in across multiple sections, we can click the reset button. And the final way that we use zooming, and I use this a lot, and I think Roger, you use it as well, is we can double click on a segment. And that brings us right into that segment. And then when we double click on it again, it brings us back out
to a full lap.
Yeah. Right. And then Roger, as you do it, because I think it might take a little bit of explanation, is the first and the last segment even give us even more data as we do that zoom?
Yeah, typically our start finish lines are in the middle of the front straightaway, right? And as data folks, we want to have acceleration zones, or understand that acceleration off of the last corner all the way to the braking into the first turn. But yet we as a company, and we as data, for consistency reasons, we want our start finish lines to be at the actual start finish line of a track. I think it just makes more sense. So we end up with a straightaway coming off the last corner. If we look down here, you can see that of the little track map, you can see that the dot is at the last corner. And then there's the Posey straightaway, and then you hit the start finish line here at the end of the right edge of the screen. And then we've got from the start finish line into turn 1, there's an additional straight. So kind of a cool way that they've built into this to be able to zoom in and use it is by double clicking on either of these green straights at each end. You end up with not only the straightaway getting coming to the start finish line, the blue line that is the start finish line, and then the remaining straightaway after it. So now you can do some quick analysis visually, certainly, maybe some delta measuring or whatever you might want to do of the two pieces of straightaways that are together typically at the end and beginning of each track. So very, very handy tool. I really enjoy that they've done with that. And then the other thing about that bar, obviously I've done it here. I am no LimeRock expert, but I went and found a couple of track maps. This is some of Matt's data from LimeRock, which I think is available to you, to everybody out there. You have names. We don't no longer call everything by numbers. So some tracks we still do, certainly, but we can either create these with numbers, or we can go ahead and rename them with the most commonly well-known names of the facility, which is what I've done here. So, okay. Anything else you'd like to add there, Matt, before we?
Yeah. One that you and I found just recently, if you can zoom into the front or the back straight again.
Front or back straight.
So I'm sorry, the beginning or the end. Sorry.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, boom, right there.
The blue line for start finish.
Oops, and I picked the last lap. I didn't mean to do that. So let's jump back out. And I was wondering why the RPM went funny there. And then did this one. Okay.
It was a funny driver.
Yeah.
So we get this blue line, and you can see in the graph it's at the foot marker on it at the bottom is 0, 0. This blue line always indicates a start finish line. And it caught me off guard the first time I saw it, and I couldn't quite figure out what it was. So that's always at start finish. So if we zoom out
Back
again,
out.
Roger, yep, and scroll out, so we have multiple laps now, and you'll see these blue lines come up at every start finish. It caught me off guard the first time I saw it because I wasn't sure what it was, and then I kind of realized where they go and what it was signifying. And you'll see that as you interact.
Yeah, there is a difference in Ray Studio 2 to Ray Studio 3 for those of you that are transitioning over to this. We used to be in Ray Studio 2, you could scroll out, hit the down, the back arrows, whatever it happened to be, and it would go out and it would respect the lap limit. And I got into the habit of always just coming out to the full lap, right? With my mouse. That would just bring me out to a full lap. Okay, now I'm back kind of home base. I'd look around, zoom in a little bit, and then I just scroll with the wheel real quickly. Now it goes past that, and there are very, very good reasons it does that, and I've gotten to the point where I'm okay using it this way. But just the difference of how it works. So we have the straightaway here, right, following the blue line, and there's the straightaway here following the blue line. So I can roll all the way out and look at a temperature or an oil pressure and see the trends of those things by zooming out. So,
and one of the things that I do like about the storyboard is if you zoom out to a couple laps, Roger, see the storyboard shows that section of laps you're looking at.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's a pretty powerful way to see what you're looking at and where it is.
And if you've seen something in a channel and you wanted to go over to it, you can just grab that, and it takes all 3 of those laps and slides them over, or however far out we're zoomed, right? And it might even be more, right? So, right. Yep, exactly. So the storyboard is giving us a little bit of a visual of exactly where we're at, or even if we're zoomed in, the storyboard is telling us where on the lap we are, based because each of these little gray lines are the lap lines. So.
Right. And another quick one is, because we got a little bit out of order here, but we're looking at all our zoom options. One of the things I really like with zoom is the snap button. And what snap button does is that locks us into what we call a slice, a specific lap. So when we click the snap button, it lets us go to as much of the session as we want. And then if we hit our zoom reset button, it gives us the whole session.
Boom.
So with 2 button clicks, we can get down to the whole session. And if this was a temperature or something, we could look for the rise and use it all those different ways.
Vehicle health, I always start with this, right? Vehicle health, I want to have my oil pressure, I want to have my water temperatures, transmission temperatures, whatever it happens to be, all laid out in some channels, and then I can watch the trend of what everything's doing. So having that ability to, and then snap. Let's just briefly talk about that again for just a quick second. But the snap mode is when it's enabled, we are respecting the laps. Right, we're snapping 2 laps, the start finish line. When snap is off, we're now. It is a data set, and we can just zoom out and move around, and it's still showing us the laps end and begins, but it's not respecting them as far as stopping there and moving around. It allows us to go all that. We're no longer snapping into lap to begin and end of laps. So perfect. The storyboard. Let's talk a little bit about that, and that it's probably going to default on when you first open up a time distance plot. How do we can resize it, we can turn it off, we can continue to use it, right? And whatever channels we turn on up here, we'll talk about adding some channels here in just a second, but we can put our arrowhead here, our cursor in between, and make that a little bit smaller if we want a little bit bigger. Same thing with the sides. We can make these bars a little bit smaller, a little bit bigger. I try to keep the size of the channel names, where I can read them. I don't want to button those up too tightly off to the side. And I tend to leave this open all the time. We'll talk in our advanced topics of how to get rid of that quickly here a little bit later. But the storyboard. It's been one of those things. Jokingly, we play with each other a little bit that way. Matt and I do. I am a huge storyboard fan. Have always been. It is a fixture on almost every screen that I set up, and Matt doesn't use it typically, right? So the maybe we want to turn that off. Matt, let's walk through a process of moving around and turning off and turning on a couple of things and see how that works.
Yeah. So as we're looking at our graph and we start to turn on some more channels, because here we have RPM. So say we want to add speed.
And we've got a search box here we didn't talk about, right?
Yep.
And
that search box is so powerful.
And since I quickly scanned when Matt said he wanted a speed, we do have some wheel speeds here, but GPS speed is kind of our home base nowadays, right? And I had a couple of options as soon as Matt started to say that. Do I come over here and just grab the slider bar and go down to the GPS base channels because they're usually grouped together? There are ways to make them be grouped together. I could have just come down here and found that and did it, or if I were to come up here and just do speed, it would take everything that had speed in the name. I could then easily find the GPS speed, and then we can click on it, right?
Yep.
Boom. We've just added the GPS speed onto that. And then I can hit the little X to get rid of it and get back to the full menu if I want to. Okay.
So now here's one of the most common spots where we get support calls and people need some help with this. Is we look at this, we go, man, this is kind of a mess. Like, how, we have different colors. How do we pull this apart? And that brings us to the display of the views. So the buttons on our top right, they give us 3 ways to view the data. And when we start to look at it, we can have them all overlapped. And that's what we're looking here. It puts all the channels we pick. And if we pick 10 channels, it just smooshes this all together. We can have, and maybe put a couple on here, Roger. So this is a mess, right? Nobody can make any sense of what we're looking at here. So the next one we can do is to have it mixed. But I think that's kind of the hardest one to understand. So if we go to the third option, and now we have them tiled. So it puts every single channel that we pick on its own strip chart, on its own graph, so that we can discern which one that we're looking at. And when we look at them to the opposite side of where our cursor is, so right now we're kind of on the left side of the graph, to the right, we get the display name of what we're looking at. So we have RPM at the top, front right shock, front left shock, and so on. And it gives us the measure of what we're actually looking at. So we see that the RPM at the point the cursor's at is 4,500 or 4,671. So now we have some data we can really work with. But say you're like Roger and you always go, you know what, speed is the most important thing we're looking at. I want that at the top. So now what we have to do is go into the mixed graph.
Well, we have 2 options, right? And we'll do it first with the mixed graph, but we also have the option of sorting these channels over here. But the fastest and easiest way is by going to the mixed graph. And as soon as I click that, it looks like that mess we had when we had the overlapped, right? Right off the bat. And it's
just unusable.
Yeah, unusable, really. And there's a reason behind that is you are given some numbers over here. And these numbers are telling us we can put it into their spots in the graph. And right now they're all on 1, so they're all handling the number 1 area. And we want GPS to be number 1, we want RPM to be second, and then we want our 4 shocks, right? So if I just leave the GPS speed at number 1, we'll leave that one alone. RPM, let's move it to the second one. The way you do it is simply just click on the number. And it's a 6-way toggle. So there's number 2. I put RPM in number 2, so we've got a number 1 and a number 2. We have 6 options. So let's take our left front shock and make it 3. And then our right front shock, we'll be putting window number 4. And our left rear shock in 5. I'm just clicking it. And then just a little trick here, instead of having to click this right rear shock a bunch of times to put it into the 6th window, you can hit the control button, hold that down and click one time, and it runs in reverse. So you can either run in reverse with the control button or in forward with just with the clicks, and you end up with being able to put these in the order that you want. Some people will find that this is important enough so their eyes start to pick up where things are. Other people can have them graphed in any order, and it doesn't bother them, and it doesn't affect their data analysis. So you have some options. You can either allow them to go all together where you want, stack them on top of each other, or run the mixed view with the little icons and build them where you want them. Or the biggest option a lot of people use is they stack certain channels on top of each other, and maybe it would be throttle pressure and brake throttle position and brake pressure. Maybe you're both on line number 3, because you can actually mix those and get a really good idea of some pretty cool things. The mixed graph is a very, very powerful tool for getting the things to look the way that you want this.
Yeah. And I'd say for a long time when I started out with AIM in Ray Studio 2, I didn't ever really use the mixed tiles. The mixed view, I always use tiled. Now I'm always in mixed, because I kind of have a setup that I want, and I want to look at my data in a certain way, because I always think speed, gas, brake, because that's what I'm driving, right? That's what I'm going for, is I got speed, gas, brake.
Again, user definable, right? So if anybody that's listening to this has a different method that they'd like to use, the software is, and we've talked about these options of putting the data in ways that you would want to see that. So
yep.
Okay, so we've kind of gone through those buttons on the upper right. There's a couple more up there I want to get to in just a moment. The only other one I wanted to look at real briefly is there is some options over here where we can, the configuration on the channels button, we can come in there and sort in a couple of ways that are really powerful. We can sort by configuration, which is what we already had. So things that are kind of, our analog channels, our ECU channels, our GPS channels, they're stored in those areas, right? The other thing we can do is just go to a sort by alphabetical. And now everything, the first letter is a little easier to find sometimes. If you're having to search, if you didn't have that search box, I probably would do something like this. The other one is sort by channel type. So now we've got sorting by the channel type itself, right? So all the different things that we might want to look at: ECU channels, calculated channels, and on and on and on. And then the last one, which we won't do a ton of here today, but we can come in and create the appropriate order of these channels in the list of something that we might want, that you as a user might want. This way, I could put GPS at the top of this list, right? I could go down here, I could take my transmission temp and push and hold it and drag it up and put it to the top of the list and drop it and click on OK. Transmissions temp is now the top of the list. So you can take a little bit of time and sort those in an order that you want. If it's outside of the order that, oops, wrong button. If it's outside of the order that we talked about by configuration alphabetically or channel type, and then you can come in and you can you custom sort it, and then to edit your sorts, you've got some additional buttons here now, additional options. Matt, let's talk about, before we jump out of this screen and actually start to manipulate the screen, start adding some functionality to it. You use, I know, a couple of these buttons up here a lot. What is the lapse button and what's the little wrench?
Somebody had brought up a point, and I think it's a good chance to hit it, is if we go back, before we jump to that one, if we go back to our overlap tiles, so we have overlap views, and maybe we turn off a couple channels, so we just have 3.
Okay, boom. Boom. We'll just leave one shock on there, right?
Perfect. When we hover over the channel name in the channel list, we get a checkbox next to it. And that checkbox goes with the graph, the label and the scale on the y-axis.
Oh, okay.
And so this is an important one, because sometimes you want to know what that is, or maybe it's something like throttle and you don't care what the exact number is. You care about the shape of the profile, or brake, where you really care about that shape, not the actual number for the brake pressure. This is a great way to get rid of some of that information on the left that we're not using and make our display a little more friendly.
Good point.
So those checkboxes, when we're in overlapped, anytime you have overlap graphs, you get to pick which scale, which range you get to look at.
Yeah, whether or not the scaling is even there. Yep.
Right.
Okay. Perfect. Perfect.
So then, yeah, one of my favorite buttons, and maybe we go back to just speed. We clean this up. And we can click the X's, turn off our channels. We have just speed. Say we want to look at a variety of laps without having to go in and click them all. In this laps button, we can now select all laps, our best lap, the best 3, or the best 5. Super fast way to decipher your data down to just a condensed portion of kind of your best performances based on lap time. So when we click that, it's going to pop up 5 overlay graphs for us.
Yep, immediately. And you didn't have to go down here and find your 5 best laps. It just automatically opened up your 5 best laps, threw them up there, turned them on, and you are off and running. Best 3.
Yep.
Jump straight to your best lap. And for those that want to, if you have something you're really looking for some big trends on, you can turn on everything. Right. Can not used a ton, but we have that option, right? So Emiliano and the software team has just has seen how many laps people like to typically compare, and they've built some shortcuts to that. So that's awful nice. Mm-hmm. And what's the little wrench is for jumping into where we're probably about to go here in a moment. This is a different way of getting to the settings box, but it gives you an idea, right?
Yeah. And this is another one where we kind of have 2 ways to get here. So we can click the wrench in the top right of any of our panels and come here, or we can right click and choose settings.
And the interesting thing is the one on the right, it brings you up kind of a global settings. It gives you all the different, anything you have open, it's giving you the settings for that, right? Yep. And where if we cancel out and we go to right click and we go to settings, as Matt just mentioned, since I clicked on the time distance plot, you're only getting the settings for the time distance plot. So there is a little bit of difference there. You use that. I use that to my advantage. If I want to change several things, I will go up here and click this one. If not, I hover over the settings button for that particular this one, the settings for the channels. There's only one option, but you can grab the settings for individual things by right clicking and getting the ones for just that. So
in these settings, we're going to answer a lot of questions, because I'm reading the questions, and so many of the answers that people really want are in here.
Okay, let's walk through this real quickly.
So the first part we have is the name, and we can change that name, and it's the name of the panel. And we're going to see when we get kind of to some more advanced ways to interact with the software where that can become important. A common thought, and it's not really how it works, is that name does not display on the tab on the top left. It's only the internal name for this panel. So name, right? Pretty straightforward. The show time compare, we've done a couple of webinars.
So I can just change that real quickly. Okay. Yep. And then show time compare, that is when we have multiple laps, it's comparing our speed and time loss or gained, whether or not you want that there. I'm a big fan of leaving that on. Other people do different things. We also have the second option here, Matt. What is that?
The show differential time compare. So what's really neat here is we can look at the cumulative time compare, and it shows our time gain or loss across the whole lap. When we change this to differential, it shows it at that point and how much the rate of change that we have in a single point on the track. Super powerful, not something that you're going to use all the time, but when you want to kind of highlight where things go different really quick, that gives you a way to do it. A common thing that sometimes as people start getting into data and they're using these time distance plots, you have to have 2 laps on to get the time compare, because it has to compare a reference to another lap. Don't be confused. If you only have 1 lap and you click this, you say, okay, nothing happens. It won't until you have multiple laps.
Yeah, there's 2 things actually. You have to have two laps, number 1, and this time compare bar can be it defaults to being the same size as everything else. Number 1, you have to have 2 laps, as Matt says, but you also can't. It doesn't time compare if you're in time mode. So you have to be in distance mode, and you have to have 2 laps or more. Those are your restrictions, and have it turned on, right? So there's three things when people call me and say their time compare is not showing up. Is it checked? Are you telling it to turn it on? Are you in distance mode? And do you have more than one lap?
Mm-hmm.
So, okay.
Next sessions, we can change the line thickness and the dot size here instead of using the buttons.
Mm-hmm.
The other one that I think it becomes real user preference is the cursor cross lines. We can change how wide across the screen they go. And maybe so if we come back and maybe the best ways.
Let me get rid of a lap, put it in the middle, and then do it again so we can see it. So you see this is what's called the large cursor, right? And then we have, I think, full, and we have small, and none, and small. So I thought at first, when I first started using data, I thought full would be cool, right? And I set it at that, and now you've got this horizontal line that no matter where you go, that horizontal line. And I thought at first that would be, boy, I'd be able to see, scan and know exactly where I'm at. And that gets really busy, really in your way, really quick, in my opinion. So, but you have some options. So I like to have something there. I'm just not sure the full, the small is quite small, just a little tiny tick there. See it? And but without having anything, you can't. It's hard to get up here and find the peak speed or the minimum, the speed minimum, vmin here in the middle of a corner or something. So I'm a big fan of they've found the right size with large, in my opinion.
Okay. I agree. The only time I use the full is sometimes if you get a really bright day and you're in the sun, it helps you find that cursor just a little bit quicker.
There you go.
Channel tags. That is where right now we see the channel tags are on, and it tells us what channel we're looking at. So we see this graph is looking at GPS speed. The point the cursor's at is 58.5 miles an hour. We can turn that off so you don't see it if for some reason you didn't want that.
So now you don't have the tag, but you still do have it over here, right?
Yep.
So if you're trying to not have clutter on your main screen, you can turn that off. I think across the board, I think everybody likes to have the channel tags. Everybody's gotten used to that being there. So,
when I turn it off is when I might be comparing 4 or 5 laps, and that list of channel name every time is less important to me than knowing the exact value than knowing the
shape and sizes. Yeah. Okay. Then show with delta min max visuals.
Yeah. So this is one of the questions that I saw in there is, I think it was Kyle asked, when do we get to see these red lines, the blue lines, and the triangles, and what's going on? Race Studio 3, and just like Race Studio 2, will give you the highest value and the lowest value of your data set. And you can tell it to be always off, always on, or only when we select it. Again, user preference, but if we turn them, I think we can do either one. Let's go in and turn them on, Roger, and show people what that looks like.
Boom. And so now you've got your channel tag. And then since we told the min max visuals to be on, now you've got an 83.3 is telling us that that's your average speed over the area we're zoomed in on, because it's a sideways arrow. Your minimum is 58.4 is right here, and it's blue, so it draws a blue line right where your minimum speed was. And then there's a 115.7 pointing up. That's your maximum of this channel. It happens to be speed, so it draws right there to that spot as well. And then of course the 87.8 is our normal cursor position, right? So that's changing over there because I'm just dragging back and forth, and then it's showing us our min and our max, and then visually we can see what they are as well. So
right. So I think that was one of Kyle's questions is how could we get that?
And then if and the way that I use it, and other people, again, you do what you wish, but I put it on selected because I like to have that information occasionally. So now it's not there, but if you ever want to see it, just click on the channel tag itself, and it will add that. And if I had a second channel up and active, I can turn on the GPS speed, and I can turn on it keeps jumping back and forth because of the way the mouse is. But now I can have my channel tags there because I've clicked on the channel tag itself. So I can turn it back off at whenever I wish to as well.
Yep.
Okay. Now let's turn off that GPS lateral G's. Let's bring that back up. Show with delta is one that I'll chat about real quickly because I want to show that delta function. Right now, when you're using this red triangle and you're doing, it's a measure tool. You're trying to figure out how much speed was gained up this straightaway, let's say. You can have the rate, and it's just a slope line, right? And it's telling you how steep that line is. You can, with it, and I'll demo it in a minute. You can have the average value of this speed area, this speed trace, or we can average not zero. So if we have a switch that is taking the data down to zero, lambda sensor where if it's less than 50% throttle, the values go to zero. Then when we go across it, we'll get true averages. We're not using those zeros in the averaging. And of course, nothing. So let's put it on rate first, and let's show that one real quickly. So here is here's an acceleration zone getting onto the back straightaway. How many miles per hour did I gain going up this straightaway? Is the question, right? So if I take my delta tool, I click on it, it turns solid red. We showed you those buttons earlier. What that when this function was active, and then we can just we've clicked. And so where I was at when I turned the function on, it locked in the anchor point, and it's not in the right spot. And this is kind of a cool change from Ray Studio 2. Before we were always stuck with that. Now I can reach over and grab that guy and drag that to the V min, the minimum speed getting onto that straightaway, and then I can come up here to the second point and put it right up here to the into that straightaway. Okay. We've got some things that has been added, mainly over here in the channel tag. 97.7 is the speed of where the cursor is. It's always the first value after the channel tag. It's the cursor value. 39.2 is the miles per hour gained. It's always there. And then there's that third value. And that third value is the one that is settable in the settings of what we want. Right now it's set to rate. So that is what that value is telling us, that there is 3.3 miles per hour gained per second. The slope of that line is 3.3. And 3.3, what it really means is how many miles per hour gained per second over this distance. And that, Matt will talk about this in a minute and some of these numbers that we end up with here. But instead of that, let's change that to the average. Instead of rate, average. Boom. And now that number here, the first one again is the second click. The second value is the difference between the two. Always, those two are always going to be the same. And then we've got that third choice, and since we told it was average, that between there and there, between the beginning of that straightaway and the end of the straightaway, our mile per hour average is 77.9. Okay.
And this is such a powerful feature. And one of the questions that Peter had in the chat box was about, he wished he could have the average across a lap. The really easy way to do it, if you're just in a time distance, you don't have a channels plot or anything, or a channels report, is you can just move these points to the beginning and end of the lap, and it'll give you that average as you grab the whole lap.
You now have the average for that lap, right?
Yep.
Of miles
there's
per
better
hour.
ways
It
to
could
get
be
it,
temperature. It could be any channel you want. You just happen to be playing with speed.
Right. And then the other neat thing is, let's go back to our straightaway example.
There you go.
And above the red line, we see the timestamp of 20.378 seconds. So, and it goes with 2309.2 feet. So that's the point in the lap that we are clicking our first selection.
Starting our measure.
Right. And the second point, the numbers aren't that point, but they're the difference. So our second point of the delta is 11.99 seconds later, and it's 1,381 feet later. So we know what that distance is. So say you're figuring out gearing, or you're looking at something to see what the longest straightaway is. Really quickly with the delta, you can come in here and see that difference and compare the straightaway distances or the time change or anything like that. It's a neat way to look at some different analysis techniques. And we've looked at them before about maybe acceleration rates, how long a straightaway is, how long you're in a corner, to get those numbers really quick.
Perfect. I'm a huge fan of the Delta. This is a change in the way that Ray Studio 2 worked, so that's
Mhm.
why Matt spent a little bit of time on it. Let's kind of tidy this up with some. We've talked a little bit about the advanced functions, but let's get rid of the storyboard and let's add the video just as a couple of things we can do with this screen, and then let's talk about a couple of advanced topics beyond that. Different channels and different panels, let's say. So let's leave the storyboard because that'll make that easier to see probably. How do we add a the video file over here so we can see that as part of it? The way that we would do that is simply by finding the one that we want, where we kind of think it through, right? Where do we want the video to be playing when we look at it? So I want it to the right of the channel's main measures graph here. So I right clicked and I want to add a window. And this is going to be for anything you might want to add. I want to click it and add it to the right, it's going to give us a list. First, it threw up the box where it's going to go. And it says, well, what do you want to see in there? So I can come in here and everything that I don't already have is in this list, right? And it happens to be that I want to see movies for this particular thing. So I'm going to click on that, click on OK. We now have the video and data is synced in Ray Studio 3. It was that easy to add a button, maybe add another function, maybe resize it where it's a little bit smaller, resize it where it's a little bit bigger, all saved in the user profiles. And now all of a sudden we have our measures graph and we have our video. Okay, that's pretty cool. We could add different things. Maybe we wanted to add something down here. I don't think we have time to do that right now, but we could add even more, right? Or take things away. The last thing that I really wanted to touch on here is an advanced function that we'll get is one of the things I get the questions on the most. If we wanted to have, we've got the speed showing in the measures graph. We've also got the speed channel showing down here in the storyboard. There's some additional power that's available to us if we come up here and we right click and we go to the settings and we say, I want to allow a different channel in this panel than I do in other panels, right? So allow different channel in the panel. So I'm going to click on OK. I'm going to do the same thing. You see that the channel went away. It goes, OK, re-add the channel back in. I'm going to do the same thing down here in storyboard. I'm going to click on the right click, I'm going to settings, and I want to allow a different channel in that panel as well. And what my goal is here is to have speed and RPM in the upper window, and I want to have water temperature or oil temperature or something that maybe gives us a view. Maybe we'll have speed and a temperature down below and speed and RPM up here in the middle one. By setting that setting, it took things away. Okay, so now I want to add my GPS speed. You see that it's still in my list because it was there, but it's asking me, where do you want it now? Basically, if I right click on top of that, a new option is showing that we did not see before because we've told it to allow different channels and different panels. It's asking me show in. Remember I changed the name of this box to driver. So that's the reason why the name driver is showing up there. It is always a time distance tab, but I can rename it. So if I want GPS speed to show in driver, just select it. I also want GPS speed to show in my storyboard. We are right back where we were a moment ago, right? Okay, but the added power is I want to see my oil temperature down here, and as it grew during the run, I want that to be in the storyboard. So if I come down here and I look for anything that with temp in it, and let's say looks like oil tank temp, let's turn that on, and then again, if I right click on this, do I want to see it up here in the driver up here? I might, but I might not, but I certainly do want to see it down in the storyboard. And what's interesting about this now is, let me close that filter out. I now have my GPS speed. Let's turn on RPM. That's what I said I was going to have up there. I want to right click and I want to show that in my driver. I want to sort those by the on top of each other just for fun. And now I have my my speed, my RPM, and I have my speed down here at the bottom in my storyboard, and I can see as the oil temperature was coming up, and about here, maybe in this area, lap 15 or so, as it kind of peaked finally, and ran the rest of the session before he ended. That's an advanced function that a lot of people begin to use, and then it gets a little confusing. And so I wanted to go over here really quickly. Is if you turn on, just to reiterate, if you turn on allow different channels and panels, which is something you're probably going to want to do eventually, if you don't do it already, if you turn that on, now I can put different things. Let's say I had a scatter plot, over right here, a histogram, right? So we could add a window to the right here. Oops, I knew I was going to do that, right? Add a window to the right. I'm not too good at that yet sometimes, but and we choose, and let's say histogram, and it's going to add any channels that I might want to. Let's say I do not want to show that.
Well, this is where it comes up into this is why I consider this an advanced functionality of the software, because it can get really confusing really quick on why things are showing in different spots. And this really shows what happens right away, is that when we add that new window, by default, it shows all the active channels. So if Roger right clicks it and goes into the settings, we will see that it does not have that box checked.
Exactly.
So if we check that box, okay, now we have the blank one, but we get to pick whatever we want.
Now I would show in and show it in the histogram. Right. And if I would have clicked, and let's get rid of that, let's delete that window, remove that window. If I would have clicked on this and did, add a window below, now I would have my histogram where I wanted it, right? So I could choose and histogram, and of course it's going to come in the way we just did, as you just mentioned. Choose, and let's allow different ones, and I only want to have the RPM, let's say, in that histogram. Boom, we've got a histogram now. So there's you're able to, that's, as Matt said, that's an advanced topic that I wanted to make sure we covered, because every time I get in here and I start to show the power to some different people, if I come up here and try to turn off my oil tank, my GPS speed, let's say, right? A lot of times we're just used to clicking the X, and I just clicked the X and nothing happened. and that's the first time people go, what in the world? It's not working the way it's supposed to. It's because, you try to turn it off, but you're showing it in two spots. And because of that, we need to then come in. Which one do you want to show, turn it off in? I want to turn it off in my storyboard. Okay, now I've just shut it off there, and it's still in my measures graph. So anything else you'd kind of like to add? That I have not had a chance to look at some of the questions. We're just a tick over time. Anything we ought to
I think that area answered a lot of questions. The other one is if we go to the gear in the top left for our options.
Oh, that's right. We chatted about, I wanted to make sure we went there, right?
We did, and this is the one, and it's another pretty powerful spot that we get to interact with the software in our own way. So when we go into these options, we get to pick all our colors, and we get to pick whether we're in the light or dark mode.
This is where most of the time we come, right? And if I just wanted to have an overall dark flow, a default dark, these are the colors that it's going to apply it. Boom. That's a quick way of doing that. So and if that works for you, that's fine. If not, come back to the little the general options, and we can just click that right back to light. And the last one that I wanted to show there is, and it's Emiliano, I think, is here. The last one I'd like to show is there's a really important option here at the bottom that we're not going to be able to get into deeply, but it's just off the scroll off the bottom, number of allowed reference slices, and it defaults to 2. We've gotten a ton of calls that say, I've opened up 3 laps and I'm only seeing the data from 2 of them, or I can only see 2 videos. And that is because we're giving it a maximum number of reference slices or laps of a number here, and your options are 2 or 4. And so if you let me turn that back to 2 just to prove the point real quickly. Okay. And if we were to come in here and open up, go into our laps tab, well, let's use the other option that we've talked about, laps, and then 5, right? Let's say we're only showing 2 channel tags, even though there's 5 lines, and we're only showing 2 videos, even though there are 5 videos. And there's a lot of programming reasons behind this. We've got huge data sets that people bring in here, and we could just bring a computer down to its knees, right, and overwhelm the screen where you couldn't see anything. So we're trying to give a little bit of an option here of which to not overwhelm it, but we still give you the option over here on near the actual laps of saying the ones with the 2 eyeballs are the 2 that are open. And so we could easily just come up and click on another one and click on and end up with the 2 laps we may want to look at, right? Of the reference laps are available. If I simply went in here, oops, I went to the wrong spot, of course, right? And click on here and options, scroll down, we could change that to 4. And I've had that happen before.
This is what catches some people is we have to go to the eyeball. I say it's the eyeball like that and turn on those other
and turn on the other 4. It doesn't automatically turn them on. It just makes room for you to turn them on, right?
Yes.
So thank you, Matt, because it did stump me for a second there, as it always does everybody, myself included. And so now we've got the 4 that we wanted, and we can't turn on the 5th one, right? So if I were to turn this one on, it's going to take the slowest one away, I think. So that there's 2 things that we are catching people. I know we're a little over time. Number 1 is the ability to sort and move things around, add some different things, the option of allowing different channels and different panels. That is an advanced option that is very, very powerful, but it makes the software react slightly differently, so you need to be up on top of that. And then the other one being the options and the reference slices numbers. I've just tend to default that to 4 for my own stuff, and leave it at that. I understand there's some thought of us bumping that up a little bit from the programming side. We'll chat with Emiliano and see what he says later, but we will see. Perfect. Any other questions in there that we did not cover, Matt?
No, I think we got all the questions that are specific to this. We had a couple questions that if you still have them after, shoot us an email and we can answer them about kind of how to change names and profiles and do some of those. We've done some great videos on those that I think will be able to help you out quicker than trying to go through it all here.
Exactly.
And the same thing, there was a question about time versus distance. When would you use it? And we have some other ones. I did a real beginner session on that really dug into time and distance and how we look at things. But I think this gave everybody a pretty good overview of all the options that we have in Ray Studio 3 to look at time and distance.
Perfect.
And how you can really customize it to what you want to look at.
The only thing I would add at this point is, just like you as a user would do, we've got this set up. It may or may not be right for something you might like, right? But with the histograms and the speed and the RPM and the movies. But let's say it is. The user profiles, your life is going to be so much easier if at this point you come over and we go to saving the profile. And I want to save profile as because I want to give it a name. We could have just saved this default of analysis 0001 because I started with no profile. But I'm going to save profile as, and we're going to call it the time distance webinar. And I'm going to click on OK. It'll take just a brief second. They've been working really, really hard on getting these things to store them much quicker. It was done quite a long time ago, as I just talked about it. But I now have everything stored under TD, time distance webinar. Okay. Any changes I might make, whether small enough as this or a channel color or anything, everything is stored in the profiles. So I just made a small little change there. I would come back over here and I would just save that profile. And that profile now will always be there. Next time I open up anything, number one, it's going to open where I closed. If I close this, opened up a whole different test, TD webinar will be the active profile. And you may end up with a bunch of different profiles, and you probably will. And it's all going to be good. So make sure you save a profile later on. If anybody wants that profile, I'm going to export it out after we get done. And it'll be a downloadable file where you could import that profile for your own if you want to get yours right here. You're brand new and you want to get some of the stuff done that we just did here. Okay, Matt, anything else you'd kind of like to chat about on our way out?
No, I think we hit all the big points of the time distance. If people have questions or they have any trouble, grab Roger, grab me, and we'll help you out on how to get through it so you can make this data work for you.
I knew this was going to be the toughest one. It's the most complex function we have, and we did go a little bit long, but not terrible. I do want to make sure that everybody knows there is a document that was linked in the chat here for those here live. Those of you that are here later watching on YouTube, this document called Ray Studio Analysis 3 Time Distance. I have taken we do have a 1.0 user manual that we put out for while the software was beta. Italy is redoing this document now, but this will be helpful to you. So I just took the time distance layout main page, and then there is just a whole row of time, chapter 4.3, where it talks about all the different functions for just the time distance function. So that document will be available for you down in the YouTube link. It's a PDF. Go ahead and download that, and you'll have a lot of stuff we talked about, plus many, much more detail than what we were able to go into here today. Okay. Perfect. So that's that document. Let's bring up the PowerPoint back up. And this one, just like all of the rest of them that we do, we'll be running up and putting up onto our YouTube site just as fast as we can. We're about 201 videos up there right now. 138 of them, 136. This is number 136 of them are these long form, about 1 hour, getting into some depth into individual topics. So, or some great interviews with different people that we've done, book authors about data things, all sorts of cool stuff in there. If you want to not only get some very technical stuff like this, but also some different forms of discussion around the data and data analysis world, lots of great videos there. Customer support, boy, we're in spring. Spring is here. Racing season is upon us, right? So I know our AIM staff have been running like crazy already. We're out there at tracks every weekend. Take a look, see if you can find us. If we're not at that track, because a lot of races every weekend, we're a phone call away, just or an email away. So we are available and open to helping answer any of your questions, obviously. So it's a great thing. What are we going to talk about next week? Next week, we're going to walk right down the icon row, and the next one is channels report, where it's a little bit less complex than this one, although it's a pretty powerful tool as well. Obviously, we're going to come in and we're going to talk about channel reports. We're just going to open it up. We're going to talk about what some of the different options are, and how to create it, and at the end save you a user profile just like we did here, and also include that one more advanced. The last 5 or 10 minutes will be some advanced topics inside of this one as well. James Colburn is going to join us. Always well received here. Always well liked. A good friend of mine. Good friend of many that are here. Looking forward to that. And James will be joining us next Tuesday, a week from today, to talk about channels reports. And we're going to walk through every one of them. So if you're seeing this one for the first time, go down into the description box, and I'm going to have links to every one that we've done of all the Ray Studio 3 stuff, and all of the different functions will be linked down below. Here's the ones we've done so far. Here's today's webinar. Of course, we'll have a link to that here shortly. This list will be in the YouTube box below, and I will go back on other ones that we've done. All of these other ones above it, I will go back and we will continue to fill in these links to make it easier for you to find the different videos from every video. Perfect. A little contact information. If you have some questions that you want to throw at Matt or myself, there is a couple of email addresses for you. I appreciate everybody being here. This has been a good one. A bunch of good information. Matt, anything you'd like to kind of add on our way out?
No, I had a great time. I think we covered a lot of material. We showed how it can get as easy as you want to make it, or as hard as you want to make it. So, if you're at home and you're watching this, jump into your software, start playing with it as you're doing things, and make it your own.
Until you click that save profile button, you can get in there and mess it up all you want, and then bail out. The other thing you can do is save a profile and save a dummy profile and just start goofing around and saving it. And you can't hurt things. In other words, so jump in, play, and we can always jump back out and grab some profiles from us or some other friends. Have some saved up on the side. You can't screw it up. So like Matt says, go in there and start playing around. It's you can get just figure out tons of stuff by clicking around. Thank you, Matt. Thanks everybody for coming. I appreciate it. Looking forward to seeing everybody here next Tuesday for the Channels Report and James Colburn. We'll have a great time. Everybody, talk to you next Tuesday.